Welcome to episode 225 of Real Health Radio. You can find the show notes and the links talked about as part of this episode at 7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/225. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. So one tiny piece of housekeeping before I get started with this. During the week commencing the 15th of February, so a bit over a week after this episode comes out, I'm going to be opening up my practice again to new clients. I'll be doing more of a push then. We're talking about it and putting out more content starting that week. I'm just getting everything set up for that now. But yeah, if you're interested and want to find out more, you can head over to seven-health.com/help, so HELP. And that's all I'm going to be saying on it right now. But if you're interested in finding out more about working together, then you can check it out. So on with today's show. And today it is a guest interview, and my guest is Fiona Willer. So Fiona is an Advanced Accredited Practising Dietitian who combines academic research, university lecturing and public speaking with creating professional development resources and training for health professionals through her business, Health Not Diets. Her research areas are dietetic private practice benchmarking, interpersonal learning, health conscientiousness and dietary quality, and the integration of weight-neutral lifestyle approaches, including health at every size and the non-diet approach, into the practice of health professionals, particularly dietitians. Fiona has served on the boards of international and domestic organisations, including Health at Every Size Australia, the Association of Size Diversity and Health, and now Dietitians Australia. Creator of innovative Unpacking Weight Science professional development podcast, Fiona has great enthusiasm for both integrating weight research and overusing food and eating metaphors in everyday life. So I've been aware of Fiona Willer for a number of years now. I'd known that she had a podcast called Unpacking Weight Science for a while, but truthfully, I just kept listening to other things instead. But towards the end of last year, this changed, and I went back through and have now listened to the vast majority of the episodes. And Fiona really knows her stuff and is incredible as a researcher. And so I wanted to have her on the show to demonstrate those skills. So as part of this episode, we chat about Fiona's background and her thesis for her PhD, which is fascinating, and what it finds about the importance of body appreciation is something everyone should hear about. We talk about Fiona's history with an eating disorder and how recovery for her helped her move from a weight loss focus to a more weight neutral practice. And then really the bulk of the episode is spent going through topics that Fiona's show, Unpacking Weight Science, has touched on, and things that I loved and wanted to get a chance to discuss with her and flesh out. So we discuss the Look Ahead study, we discuss malnutrition at every size, overeating, craving, and binging was another episode. And then finally, how blood test markers are impacted upon by restriction. And one thing I want to mention is there's a couple of terms that we use a lot. So one is weight inclusive and one is weight centric. And these are terms that are used a lot during the conversation, especially weight centric. And we do cover what they are, but not properly at the start. So I wanted just to mention it here so you're not confused at first, and if you've just not heard of these descriptors before. So weight centric means weight focused. So the outcome that is being prioritized or focused on is weight loss. So centric meaning central. So weight loss is central to the whole approach. So that's what weight centric means. And then weight inclusive means the opposite. So the goal is to improve health, but all weights are included without the goal of weight loss. So if weights change unintentionally, whether they're up or down, that is okay. But the goal of weight inclusive approach is not focused on weight changes as an outcome. So those are those two terms. I just wanted to mention it up front because they do get used a lot. Fiona is a fantastic guest, and I loved getting a chance to chat with her. The 2 hours just really flew by. I'll be back at the end with a couple of recommendations, but for now, let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Fiona Willer. Hey, Fiona, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Hi.
So I'm a huge fan of your podcast, Unpacking Weight Science, and I've been doing this work for a long time and feel fairly well versed in it. But I still learn something new or many things new with every episode I listen to. And I love your research and scientific approach. And would just like to share a lot of that on the show today. And I thought we could use some of your episodes as a jumping off point for discussions. But I'd also, like to find out about you and your background and your practice and how you become so passionate about health at every size and its integration into dietetics. So that's kind of what I want to cover. And I guess to start off with, do you want to give listeners a bit of background on yourself? So who you are, what you do, what training you've done, that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to to hear how interested you are in my work too, which is lovely. So I am a dietitian. I'm now an Advanced Accredited Practising Dietitian in Australia, which is basically Australia's registered dietitian equivalent, with an advanced practice credential on top of that, basically. I've just about wrapped up my PhD. The thesis is written, it's under examination. And my thesis was in the integration of health at every size interventions in dietetics and because a PhD is a lot of research. So I looked at whether it's evidence-based practice within dietetics, and I also extended it to look at when people in the community take a health consciousness focus rather than a weight control focus, whether there's any difference between how physically active they are, their dietary quality, so how broad and varied their usual dietary pattern is, and also mental health factors like their self-compassion, their body appreciation, that kind of stuff. And I was very pleased to find that there is a relationship there, and the more health focused and least weight focused people are, they tend to have a spontaneously broader sort of more health supporting dietary pattern, which is kind of cool, I thought. It was not the hypothesis. The hypothesis was that they were going to be the same. The finding was that they weren't, and even, more, satisfying, I guess, for somebody who's quite passionate in this field. It was actually, that the health focus won out. So that's kind of cool. What else? My day job is as a lecturer in nutrition and dietetics at a big university in Australia, and also providing courses and professional development and podcasts in unpacking weight science, particularly sort of getting to the bottom of where the weight bias is in the research that we read, and how to sort of look beyond that to interpret beyond just the impact of starvation, I guess, in these studies.
Yeah. No, and do you also have a practice of your own? Like, are you practicing as a dietitian and seeing clients, or not anymore?
I did for a long time. I had a private practice for about 7 years. Straight out of uni, I bought a private practice that was long established, and continued that on until my family moved areas. So my private practice was face-to-face back in the time when we actually did that. We didn't do any virtual practice. And so at that point, I decided that I would sell the private practice and focus on the PhD and the business side of things for a while, because doing a lot of things ends up being quite exhausting. So I wanted to focus on that stuff. But I am considering going back to private practice. It's now back in my horizons a few years later.
Okay. I imagine the busyness with having 3 kids is also a struggle with that.
It's a lot. Yeah, we moved away and then we had another baby outside of family support networks. So that was interesting. But we're back now in big smoke. Nice. And so get my life back a bit.
And I like that mix where a researcher is also a practitioner, because I think sometimes when it is just someone who has always been a researcher, you can miss some of the nuance. You
Absolutely.
could miss some of what it's really like to be with someone, and so yeah,
Absolutely.
I've had Josie Geller on the podcast before, and I think she's another person who's similar like that, and I do think it's a really big strength.
I agree. I've always identified myself as a pracademic, and my research, private practice is an unresearched area because of the nature of it. And, university-based researchers tend to research populations that are relatively easy to access, and private practice patients and clients are not necessarily those. But the focus in my research field's always been on those as well, wanting to make life better for private practitioners and for their clients.
Yeah. So tell me more about your thesis. Sounds really interesting. So what was it focused in Australia as part of the research?
Yes. Yeah. So, you've got to narrow down your research questions so that you can really decide, to explore an area deeply rather than, a broad area more shallowly in a PhD. And so the population I was interested in was Australian adults. I didn't look at teenagers or kids and their outcomes, and Australian practising dietitians as well, and particularly dietitians working with larger bodied humans, and those outcomes.
Okay. And it was then survey-based?
It was, yeah. So I had 3 studies. The first study was a survey of dietitians, both weight-centric dietitians and weight-neutral dietitians, and I looked at their knowledge about health at every size and weight-inclusive practice, and their beliefs about what it's for and how effective it is for X, Y, Z, and their attitudes towards weight-inclusive practice versus weight-centric practice as well. And I also looked at their psychological characteristics too. So I interestingly found that people who are more towards the health at every side of the weight-focused spectrum happen to also have high levels of self-compassion themselves, high levels of body appreciation, more flexible eating style. They tended to mirror the characteristics that they were more prizing in their clients as well. So that was interesting. And the weight loss dietitians tended to be more uptight, more judgmental about themselves, more rigid in their eating styles. It's fascinating.
Yeah, which actually makes a lot of sense.
I mean, it does, but when it comes out,
it's easy to teach people, I guess, what you already know from a lived experience. And if you're always restricting and always dieting and focused on weight loss as an individual, it must be very difficult to then be talking about satisfaction and hunger and fullness and all of the other components.
That's it. You can't mask for that long. If you're a weight-centric kind of, in that kind of mindset, you can't really mask as a health at every size type of person for very long before getting unmasked unceremoniously. But it's also very difficult to describe to someone who's in that weight-centric mindset what the difference is, because it's so different, just about on every metric. It's quite opposite to their sort of comfort zone and their beliefs around how people should eat and how they should eat and that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting work intellectually, but I think it's incredibly important work for the profession and for anyone who does nutrition counselling, not just dietitians. There's lots of people out there talking to people about food and their bodies, but really, really important to show people there is another way, because we've got to meet clients where they are as well. Yeah,
definitely. And maybe you can't answer this because it wasn't part of your research, but how does Australia stack up with health at every size versus other places around the world? Like, is it something that is well filtered out to the masses, or at least within dietetics? Is there quite a sizable movement? Yeah.
There is here. So my perspective on this is really built not so much by my PhD research, but just because I've served on the board of the Association for Size Diversity and Health in the US as their Vice President International for a few years. And I was one of the founding members of HAES Australia here in Australia, which is a similar non-profit organisation for health professionals to help sort of educate and support health professionals and other interested people in bringing HAES into the healthcare system here. But, obviously my PhD did talk about that, integration of these things as well. And so my perspective is, my feel of it is that the world leaders are Canada in terms of the development of HAES-based approaches in dietetics. And certainly they've over there have done for a lot longer and a lot deeper work unpacking the type, in dietetics we have this whole performative element of our job. People have this idea of what a dietitian looks like and what kind of advice one might get from a dietitian. So we've got all of this kind of those societal roles that a dietitian might play, and we're unpacking that stuff as well as beliefs about food and about body and about science, actually, and about how, the way that we've done ourselves a disservice in the interpretation of weight-related research. So Canada's really leading the field in my mind. There's more dietitians in Canada than there are in Australia, just by population numbers. Then I think Australia and New Zealand are probably next. We have a smaller profession here. There's 7,000 dietitians. I campaigned to be on the board of directors here on our national association, and my campaign was in a HAES promotion type of campaign that I led to get on the board, and I was elected on the board. And so that's part of my mandate while I'm on the board, to make sure that there is a voice for people who don't want weight-centric treatment in Australia, and to make sure that we dampen down any weight bias that might be creeping into the way that we respond to media and the way that we, have our position statements and the way that we interact with government and other, policymakers here. Then maybe the US, and I'm afraid to say I think the UK is trailing behind in terms of the larger dietetics kind of dietitian professional body countries. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I
there are some absolute superstars in the UK, absolute superstars. But I think the way the NHS is organised means that there's less, it's less able to propagate through those systems, because they're a lot more hierarchical and a lot more sort of solid in framework.
Yeah. And it's interesting when I think about Australia, because whenever I go over there and I get back there when it's not a pandemic, kind of roughly every year or every other year, and I'm from Sydney, and so I go there, is just also, so obviously there's this strong HAES aspect, but there's also a really strong aspect at the other end of the other end of the spectrum.
Oh yeah, the body beautiful stuff is
restaurants.
Really...
And there's just so much of a focus on, well, the last couple of times it's been on paleo or keto, and to a degree that I definitely don't see over here. And so it's kind of like schizophrenic in terms of these two things that are trying to live next to each other that really don't belong.
We've so, I hate using the word tribal. I'm not really going to use it. I mean, in terms of nutrition information, I think it is just a normal offshoot of the fact that there's so much information. And so you're going to find something that feels right at the time. People are really led by their gut feelings about what's, led by truthiness and dreams, rather than, what may be a more balanced view in terms of, the experience of people with eating disorders and disordered eating, and the science as well. So I just think, there are far more people giving nutrition advice in Australia than are kind of licensed to do so.
Yeah.
So that is the static behind the work that we both do, is just that people talk about food all the time. Look, and they should, but the fact that the narrative about food is usually so disparaging, just as, part of the cultural milieu, it's depressing how negative food talk is kind of normal.
Yeah. And just getting back to your research, one of the things you said was that if there is a focus on health, that the outcomes can be just as good. Is there a kind of threshold where that changes? And the reason I'm asking this is I have a lot of clients who focus excessively on health, and it is not then about health, but it to them it feels about health. And so did you find that in your research that past some point it's actually not healthy?
Yeah, so the community study I did was a cross-sectional study, so a whole heap of people, but only at one time, right?
Okay.
And so I had more than 3,000 participants, and more than a third of them were people who identified as as men. So that was that's amazing.
Yeah.
It was difficult to get so many men, but it was great that actually ended up with heaps in there. And so what I found when I looked at the characteristics that I assessed for, and I controlled for the things we usually control for, so things like socioeconomic status and age and education status. I didn't control for BMI because it's not really a valid thing to control for, because it loads up on top of a whole heap of other things and messes up what you're actually kind of looking at. When I put all that into multiple regression analysis, basically means that it can kind of weed out what's doing the work, like what is the when one point changes, it changes more of the other things, basically. That's what multiple regression does. I love stats. It's a bit difficult to explain them. But anyway, basically you put it all in there and it figures out what is behind the things, what's the sort of prime factor that's moving these factors, the outcomes. And so I was predominantly looking at dietary quality and physical activity level as well. And I found that it was body appreciation that was doing the most work. So the people who got the highest dietary quality scores were those who tended to have the highest level of body appreciation. And I used the body appreciation score 2, which basically, body appreciation scale 2, which basically is things like it asks around unconditional body acceptance. So yes, I accept my body with everything that it is, whether it can move well, maybe not as well as other people, all that kind of stuff, that somebody absolutely unconditionally accepts it. And they also accept diversity in body shape in themselves and in others, and that they treat their bodies well, and that they have pride in themselves as a separate thing from their bodies. It's really nice and neat little scale.
Nice.
And it was really those scores were so closely related to the dietary quality scores, and it was when you took weight out of the picture. So you removed the people who either wanted to lose weight, so that they had a goal of achieving a healthy weight, that was the statement, or they were actively trying to diet. Remove those, then the dietary quality scores got a huge boost. So just leaving the people who were focused on achieving healthy habits and who didn't have any of this kind of weight consciousness going on, and there were more than 1,000 of those people in the study. It was actually, again, surprising that I managed to capture so many. They had lovely dietary quality, to the point where I could pin it on longitudinal studies of dietary quality, and the difference in the dietary quality scores was certainly enough to be able to compare against mortality stats with the dietary quality score. So basically, eating that way is related to a lower chance of various types of death, early death. So it was a pretty cool thing to find as well, I thought. And it was as if when you drop in weight centrism, it's like contaminating the well, basically.
Yeah.
You're kind of really cutting people off at the knees to be able to, eat a varied diet and, have a high level of self-compassion and body appreciation. All those other things that we know are really good for you.
Wow, that's really huge.
It is. I'm writing it up at the moment, so I wish I could point you to a paper. But as I said, the thesis is under examination, and the paper is kind of almost ready to submit. But they're the findings. I'm hoping it'll be well read.
Yeah, but I mean, it just points towards like how backwards we are with so many things, and how often you're trying to treat the symptom as opposed to the root cause, while making the root cause even worse. Whereas if you can help people feel good about themselves, feel positive in their choices, all of that the other stuff will take care of itself. But we're doing the opposite. You in a sense, you're trying to make people feel bad about themselves as a way of motivating better choices, which just invariably never works.
And so topsy-turvy. And that belief that the behaviours are really anything to do with the BMI has just it's horrible. It means that people get gaslit at their doctors' offices, or they get gaslit at home, well, how can you be trying if your weight's not changing, blah, blah, blah. But I know this research back to front, and the correlation between BMI and dietary quality and even energy intake is so small. You get a statistically significant difference when you break the entirety of humanity into like 3 BMI classes and then pit them against each other. You can get a statistical difference out of that, but actually at an individual level, there's no predictability. So you could take take 10 people with the same BMI. You wouldn't be able to predict what their dietary pattern was like, their energy intake was like, their physical activity. It's completely non-predictive.
Yeah, well, I think I've heard you.
Absurd metric.
Yeah, I know you on the podcast have mentioned it a number of times of the fact that at every BMI category, there's roughly 10% of the population, or 10% of that category, who are following the dietary guidelines, and that's whether we're at a normal or at an overweight or obese or whatever the category is. That it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, you got your range of different patterns of eating in each of the BMI categories, and the difference is enough to get a significant stats outcome, but it actually is not useful at a individual level at all.
Yeah. Well, cool. Well, whenever your thesis is done and ready to be read, I would love to read it.
Excellent. I cannot wait until the embargo's off it, because you're not allowed to share it until it's done, out there, assessed. Yeah. I passed my defence. We do things a bit differently down here, but I have passed my verbal defence. It's just the thesis bit that's the last bit now. So yeah, it's a long, protracted process. I really, really am very jealous of the PhD programs where you literally do an oral defence and they say, yes, you've done it. And then you can go out and go, boom, I've done it. It's done. Our process takes months. It's kind of really horrible.
Yeah, a lot of waiting.
Yes.
And so if we go back a little bit, just in terms of your history, like how did you get into being a dietitian or wanting to do that as a job?
Yeah, so, my first degree is in archaeology and film production. So it wasn't... So
naturally it just goes from there.
But I had an eating disorder while I was a teenager, and I studied to be a naturopath. I did half of a naturopath's degree, as it is down here. Did a lot of travelling. Anyway, and my eating disorder was kind of grumbling away in the background as a young adult. And I had a final straw kind of moment in my naturopath's course where I got a high distinction for the subject where you read irises in your eye to diagnose disease. And I got a high distinction for doing that subject by correspondence. And I thought, this kind of feels like crap. I feel like I don't want to spend the rest of my life trying to defend my whole profession, which is ironic now that I'm a dietitian. But anyway, so that was the choice at that time, was to go back to uni and do dietetics rather than continue in that sort of complementary and alternative health field.
Yeah.
And my parents are academics, so there was pressure there. So went to do dietetics and met some more senior dietetic students while I was in my first year, because I was part of the dietitians Students Association, of course, 'cause I'm addicted to being in committees, I think. And anyway, I got handed a book called If Not Dieting, Then What? By one of those more senior students. And that was my first introduction to a sort of health at every size flavoured approach.
Yeah.
And that sort of got me on the road. And I finished dietetics, bought that private practice, as I mentioned before, got some therapy for my eating disorder, and kind of unpacked my stuff as much as you can, at that sort of early phase. And it coincided with starting to do some lecturing and tutoring at uni. So again, I kind of sort of gravitate towards those roles, and I had hassled my old lecturers to see whether they needed any tutors, and it turned out that they did, which was great. But you can't go anywhere in academia without the PhD. And so I thought, right, this is it. It's changed my life. I can see it changing my patients' lives as well, because I had private practice then, and so I'm going to do my PhD in this, and I'm going to really see and pick at it and see if it's got legs in dietetics in Australia. So that was way back. I mean, I'm in my 9th year of this PhD. Do it part-time, have babies, they say. I mean, I have had 3 children, gotten married, all the rest of the things. Life has happened. So it's 9 years. I can't wait to be rid of it.
Yeah. Wow. And I mean, you talked about there having the eating disorder. Yeah. How was your treatment for that? And like all throughout the years?
Yeah, so, I mean, I had one set of, it was group therapy. So I had binge eating disorder, but of course, like most people with binge eating disorder, it actually waxed and waned between more restrictive phases when dieting, and, it's long history of weight cycling.
Yeah.
But I'm, well recovered now, more than a decade recovered now. But, yeah, so it was mindfulness therapy, my therapy, and it was for binge eating disorder specifics, and it was weight neutral. So it wasn't what I do now, and it wasn't what we do in dietetics either, but it was the sort of psychological version of weight neutral, body positive, coping mechanisms for people with binge eating disorder. So it was great, got me on my way, and then.
Did you just luck out that you got that as the treatment method, or that's pretty much the standard method over there?
No, it's definitely not the standard. And in fact, it was part of the psychologist PhD program that I got in. That was the call for participants. It was good timing. I already had an interest in this stuff from during my time at uni, but it was just what I needed at that moment to boost my own stuff and to really get me into proper recovery. So it was good. But, you can't really tell with any person when that moment's going to be. You can't predict. It has to come from inside. It has to be just the right time for them to get it and be on their way. All we can do is kind of support people until they find that spark, that moment, and continue to support them through the wobbles.
Yeah, I agree.
So my story is not going to necessarily be helpful for others, but I guess my message is, recovery is possible for everyone, I believe, with the right support and the right time, for the constellations align.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And did that mean then that when you started practicing as a dietitian that you were straight into the weight neutral approach, or there was still... I already had my private practice when I was receiving treatment. So I did weight loss dietetics for a number of years first. And it was, that was part of the light bulb moments to really get it, because, I'd have one sort of success story out of a whole heap of weight loss clients. And we're like, oh, yeah, this is the textbook now, one. And I'm like, just one. Yeah.
And I've seen so many hundreds of people for this kind of thing. This one, what's going on? Like the cogs, the cogs working.
Yeah.
It's like, well, clearly not typical. And I'm reading the research and I'm like, yeah, it's not typical in there either. And I'm like, what the hell are we doing, really?
Yeah.
So
because I think to start with, there's a okay, it must be me. Like I'm fresh as a practitioner. Maybe I don't know what I'm
that's
doing
it. But I did
well enough here.
I had life experience. I knew I was quite a good dietitian, good, information retention, good rapport, the rest of the stuff. I'm confident in my abilities as a dietitian. Not the best dietitian in the world, but certainly not terrible enough to reflect the poor results I was seeing for my weight loss clients.
Yeah.
It's like, this doesn't make sense. I don't think it's me, and I don't think that's just ego talking. So that was, there were a number of nails in the coffin for weight centrism for me.
And how was it for you then making that shift? Did it feel like, okay, now I'm going to lose a big chunk of this practice, or this is going to feel quite strange to now be going in this very different direction?
No, I mean, I was being tugged there, like my heart was tugging to do weight neutral stuff. And, a lot of the weight-centric counselling I was doing was pretty body positive. I didn't identify as being a really strict weight loss dietitian, but that was still in the goals for the clients, the agreed goals. But I was, I was clearly picking at the edges of it as I was going along as well. And so when I finally made the decision, it was a massive relief, and it was incredibly exciting and incredibly energizing to finally be free of those kind of expectations and be able to help myself and my clients look through their sort of health picture with a different lens that was much more around their autonomy and around them defining their outcomes and being really honest about how crappy weight loss goals are in the long run. So it was very, I had no tears about doing it. I was absolutely ready. It was just that last little thread, tension, and bang. It was a really exciting time of my life. So much energy.
Wow, that's awesome. And what about with the lecturing? Are you get, like, what are the other lecturers at the university? Are they all in alignment with you? Are you the one sort of ostracized person because you have these wacky beliefs? How is it? You would have to ask my colleagues, I guess. I've been teaching at this university now for like more than a decade, 12 years or something, 13. I think this is my 13th year teaching there on and off. So everybody does know me and my stuff. And I've put them all through their paces. The course is quite different in terms of the way that we teach the relationship between body weight and health outcomes. And we're really very clear about what is a risk factor versus what is a disease and where those processes are and what's an association versus what's a disease process. Does that make sense? So we're actually very good at showing the students how to understand research, like what can this type of study tell us, what can it not tell us, what do the public health guidelines, where are they located in the constellation of things that we think about with health, where do they live in relation to an individual person we might see, all that kind of stuff. So, and my area of lecturing at the moment is in a huge first year unit. So I get hundreds of students every semester, sometimes future dietitians at one time of the year, but also future exercise physiologists, people who are taking a food and nutrition course because they're doing another degree and they need to fill their electives. We've got a whole heap of people, and future nutritionists as well, not just dietitians. We teach both the clinical side and the non-clinical, more public health nutrition side too. So lots of people that will go off and talk to people about food, and others that might not, but are there for interest. And so it's really great opportunity to kind of, I love first years so much because I come in with all these, just the massive ideas that are out there in humanity about food, and they're men and women, and just all of these ideas, and to help them to unpack those beliefs and interpret research studies and read qualitative research as well, and watch out for people with lived experience and all that kind of stuff. It's it's not an easy task. That alongside, like, what is a carb
and how does digestion work and all that stuff. It's a fantastic, it's a responsibility and an honor. I love teaching that stuff.
Yeah, and I guess even if people are coming in with their prior beliefs and what they've read and all of that, the fact that they're first year and they're exposed to that, I think would make such a difference, as opposed to you trying to talk to them in fourth year and you're now having to undo 3 years of academic studies.
Yeah. It's not the thing. It's a house of cards, weight loss focus.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that much picking to go, oh, yeah, right. It's okay. And it's, you can basically, and when I teach doctors as well, medical doctors, fantastic. So, okay, get out your phone, get out Google Scholar, search for a weight loss trial that goes for more than 2 years. And you get them to do that. And I'm like, okay, look at the first graph that you've got in that paper. Can you see the shape of that graph? Does it look like this? Nike tick.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, it's not like, oh, I've got this really niche research that, this is specialized and blah, 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 blah. There's only a few subjects and it's new. It is in all the weight loss research. This is just, widening our view of the effectiveness of the way that we've been doing things, and also, shining a light on the harms associated with that way of doing things, because a long time we did not look for eating disorder harms in weight loss studies at all. It's like those researchers are completely separately siloed from psychology and eating disorder research. Completely different fields. Never the two shall meet. And so it's not a difficult task to start fraying the edges. The hard stuff is getting to those beliefs. So it's our conditioned beliefs around how a body looks if it eats a certain way, that kind of stuff. Yeah. That's harder. The research is clear, but it's those beliefs that we have. It's kind of faith-based system. When you put stuff in your mouth, you feel like you kind of know what happens afterwards. But we're wrong a lot.
Yeah. So I think it'd be good to sharpen that up a little bit by looking at the look ahead study, because I think this is something that is then nice because of how long term it is. And it was quite detailed, and there is so much information that's come out about it. So if I just kind of tee this up for you, do you just start off with like what was the look ahead study?
So firstly, when we do research, we can't do it for decades on end if we actually want to be a successful scientist, right? The timeframes have to be sensible usually. And so what that means when we're doing weight loss studies usually is we use biomarkers like your cholesterol levels or your blood sugar levels to act as proxies for the longer term things that we're worried about, like heart attacks, like strokes, like getting diabetes or getting diabetes complications like losing toes and that kind of stuff. So in the short term, we measure these surrogate markers, but in the long term, we're actually interested in those other things. We're not interested in cholesterol levels. You can't feel your cholesterol levels. Cholesterol's only relevant because of its risk relationship with heart attacks.
Yeah.
So that's the first, just to, these are the rules of the game. Now, the look ahead study was fantastic because rather than saying, okay, we're going to put people on a long-term weight loss trial, there were people with diabetes. It was a huge trial, thousands of people. Rather than just saying, right, we're going to get them to lose weight and we're going to see what happens to their cholesterol levels, what they said was, right, we're going to get them to lose weight. We're going to make them maintain it as much as you can. And we're going to see if they actually do have those heart attacks that we think they'll avoid because they've lost weight. The hypothesis is the weight loss will not just result in reduced blood cholesterol levels, but will also result in reduced heart attack rate. Because that's where the proof is in the pudding at the end, not the ingredients. And so Look Ahead had a long timeline it was funded to 14 years, I think. Thousands of people in each arm. So one of the groups, I split them in half, randomly selected. Half of them were just normal. They took their diabetes drugs. They went about their normal day. They got 1 or 2 sessions on how to eat well and how to move well in the beginning, at the beginning of this decade-long trial. The other group was their weight loss arm. They got free meal replacement shakes certainly for the first couple of years. They got, a lot of meals replaced there, and then extended on, they could continue to have those. Those who weren't losing enough weight got weight loss drugs. I mean, they really tried to get the weight loss to happen. And I think it was older adults as well, so 45 plus that were in the study. They did manage to have a average weight loss in that weight loss intervention group of about 5 to 7%. So again, we're not talking sort of biggest loser numbers here. There's nothing that's on TV. This is not entertainment kind of TV numbers here. Yeah. This is that you might not be able to even visually see on someone, that kind of weight loss percentage. Yeah. But they did manage to, because it was really intensive for that whole time. And those people also had to be really physically active. So it was an exercise and weight loss trial.
Would they have taken biggest number losses, but they just and that was what they were hoping for, but it just didn't occur? Or the goal was, let's get people to lose, 10% or 15%, or there was some lower goal that they were aiming for?
I think that, they set their goals individually in that study, which again was interesting in itself. Usually weight loss trials are lose as much weight as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And so you've got your super responders in there, which are usually your middle-aged white men who have never been on a diet before, but, it's their first rodeo, and they're in there with huge numbers. And they drag the average down, and then they reported average, it's like, 5% weight loss. Great. Yeah. But it's mostly being dragged down by these guys who've lost heaps, with most people not losing very much at all. Statistics are, it's difficult to describe 1,000 participants, even if you're doing it statistically, there's a whole heap of different decisions you have to make as to how to render that information.
Yeah.
And then you've got the element of time in there as well. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. I think with Look Ahead, they did say 7% weight loss was the goal. Okay. And if people were regaining weight, the research team was on them pretty quickly and gave them more meal replacements again and made them do more physical activity and gave them these mostly ineffective weight loss drugs. But, they really were on them.
And on them for the first year or the first 2 years, or the whole time of the study?
The whole time. The weight loss arm, officially, so everyone was ridden pretty hard in the first couple of years, but for the extended period of time, that weight loss, they really, again, they were offered, you can have this weight loss drug if the weight's starting to come back, you can have more shakes. They went beyond their initial study plan to try to white knuckle the weight loss maintenance in the intervention group in Look Ahead, which, ordinarily I'd be rolling my eyes for days, but we do want to know about these heart attacks. The interesting information is what the bottom line is around death, right? We're interested in the deathy things. And so what they found at about year 9 was they'd had enough normal passage of time for heart attacks to start happening in their population. They noticed firstly that heart attacks were not happening as frequently as they had predicted. So they used a population cardiovascular event rate to base their, the numbers on how many they would need to be able to detect something that was real in the population. They first noticed, that neither group was having a lot of heart attacks. They were having lower than the general population of heart attacks. And then they noticed that there was no difference between those who'd been given that very short nutrition and physical activity information at the, year 1, and those who they'd ridden so hard about that weight loss for the last almost 10 years, there was no difference in the rate that people are having heart attacks and having strokes in there. And so they discontinued the study. They couldn't justify it financially going on. I mean, the intervention group was getting a lot of attention from the research team. It's expensive. They couldn't justify continuing on because there was no benefit to the intervention group. And that's what happens in medication trials as well. If they find that there's no benefit, it's the trial is abandoned for futility.
Yeah.
So what we can find from look ahead is that while the hypothesis that because larger-bodied people have heart attacks at a slightly higher rate than smaller-bodied people, so if we made those larger-bodied people smaller-bodied, then surely they would have fewer heart attacks, similar to the smaller-bodied crowd. That's that's the assumption that all weight loss advice is based on, virtually. Yeah. When tested in the long term, long enough to, properly see what happens to real people in real living circumstances with their cardiovascular events, there was no difference. So that hypothesis, that assumption is incorrect, but it's very hard to convince people of that despite this amazing trial.
Yeah.
Let's look ahead in a nutshell.
It was interesting when I heard you do the podcast and then went and Googled it. Like the first however many articles I found on it would kind of giving the research trial gushing praise for what it found by doing these interventions. I was like, this doesn't seem to match up with what I've heard on the podcast.
If you read the papers that they produced at the 2-year mark and at the 5-year mark and even at the 7-year mark, they're still really optimistic that there's going to be a difference between their intervention group and their control group. And they've found, they look at the biomarkers and they found the differences. They did report pretty regularly while the trial was going, and that was, part of their funding was to continue to do that. But, when it came to the crux, the stuff that that is used in the fear-based campaigns about, you should try to lose weight, that stuff, the really deathy stuff, you're going to lose your family, you'll drop dead and, you won't be alive the next decade, that kind of really scary fear-based rhetoric around high body weight. When it got to that end of the trial, it was kind of, oh, whoops.
Yeah.
And they, even to read the paper, the mood in the paper. I mean, academic writing is a style unto itself, but I read a lot of academic papers and I write it too. There's still definite moods within papers, and there was no gotchas in those final papers. Particularly, around the reason that the trial was discontinued. It hasn't stopped them publishing a whole heap of papers like, oh, well, maybe heart attacks didn't change, but like this one or two other things, they stayed all right in the intervention groups. Like, okay, guys. Yeah.
Was there any explanation that they theorized or gave for why there were less deaths and less incidents than what they had expected? Like,
predicted.
Is it that the kind of population that puts their hands up for a trial is not?
Yes, average? You've hit it on the head there. So the kind of people that are able to volunteer for a decade plus long trial tend to be people whose lives are kind of stable. They're not going to be, those people who are financially disadvantaged necessarily. They're going to be people who've got access to their healthcare team because that was kind of part of the trial, that they continue on with their usual care. So they've got relationships with their healthcare providers that go on for years and years and years. And so it weeds out those population groups that are for high risk for chronic diseases as well. But, saying that, all of the participants did have type 2 diabetes already, but it was a healthier population of people with type 2 diabetes to start with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And one of the other things you mentioned on the podcast as well is I think that those who were in the weight loss group actually did end up doing more physical activity. They did end up having more fruits and vegetables, like things that would typically be associated with better health outcomes, and does come up across lots of different research. But in this instance, it didn't make it a difference.
Yeah, so I wondered then on balance whether that energy restriction had a negative impact. So it's kind of undone any benefits that eating well and moving regularly had for that group. But who knows? It's the data that we have, and most of these big trials do release their data sets, and I can't remember from memory whether this group did, but it's difficult to reverse engineer that kind of exploration of the data. It would need another study, but it's hypothesis building, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, it would definitely make sense in connection with so many of the clients that I work with. Like so many of them on paper are doing everything that they've been told that they should be doing, and everything that this culture is saying is healthy, and yet they've lost their period, and yet they're having osteoporosis or osteopenia in their 30s. Like there's all of these negative outcomes that are occurring because of the restriction. It doesn't matter how many fruits and vegetables you eat. Like if you're in a calorie deficit and you're getting less than your body needs, you're missing the most important thing.
That's it. And we're just so topsy-turvy about that aspect of it.
Yeah.
It makes me angry and then disappointed.
Yeah.
But, no one is in this field, and certainly in Health at Every Size, in terms of trying to help the more weight-centric providers understand where the approach may be falling down.
Yeah.
Then, rage gets you a long way in this work.
Yeah. Yeah. And even for all of the outcomes that occurred, in some ways, it's great to have something that went on this long, because as you said, most trials last 2 years. To have something that was 9 years or 11 years or however long it went on, that is so not the norm.
Exactly.
And it was well controlled. They would do it, like making sure people were keeping up the weight loss, so you couldn't then argue, well, it was because they regained the weight and that was what was happening. Like they did all of the things that could potentially be considered, well, there's this compounding, this variable.
Exactly. I mean, I am glad. I mean, I'm sad for those participants who spent almost 10 years on a diet.
Yes.
That is awful. In terms of the scientific research body, it's really good. It's going to save a lot of treatment burden of humans having that information, that phenomenon captured in the academic literature. So, I do feel for those people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I'm just I'm reading a book on the Minnesota starvation experiment. I've done a lot of reading around it, but just reading a book on it at the moment, and you're just
those poor guys,
like just brutal to be suffering like that for such an extended amount of time.
And I mean, they did not suffer from doing it because of body image issues or because of societal stigma that was hitting them every day, certainly there was societal stigma about being a conscientious objector amongst some people, but it's not like you wear that, you don't walk around with that label on your forehead. But I still feel for them. It's terrible. It was so interesting how many eating disorder cognitions develop on the background of insufficient energy intake that spontaneously appear in humans, that are part of the neuroticism of humans. It's really, turn off this food tap. This is how human brains start to work. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And it's sad that there is some level of that is going on all the time for most people.
Yeah.
That there is some level of restriction, there is some level of energy insufficiency, and maybe it's happening in moments and then it stops again for a couple of months or whatever, but it's an epidemic.
Yeah. I think the lived experience of it too, you tend to think, well, that's me. That's, my neuroticism or blah, 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 blah. But you can see clearly, like when you step away and actually look at the patterns, it's a predictable part of energy restriction in a human. And so, we've got a lot of messages to spread, don't we? That, weight centrism is dangerous for a great many people and completely ineffective for the rest. And those people who are struggling, they're not the first people to have struggled. They're not the only people to be struggling right now, and that there is hope.
Yeah. And I think the comment you made where whatever state you're in, it feels like that is the normal way of being. And it just feels like this is the self, this is who I am. And that's the thing that I experience so much with clients when they recover. There's just this realization of like, wow, like I didn't know how much this was affecting my cognition. I didn't know how much this was affecting my preference for spending so much time thinking about food or whatever it may be. And I think it's when you can then have that change occur that you notice the distance and you notice how much it was having an impact.
Yeah. And, weight centrism makes you really cynical about anything that's not weight centric.
Yeah.
So it's kind of built into the nature of it that anything that suggests that accepting yourself might be a good idea is very easily dismissed. There's a lot of, motivated reasoning to keep you in diet culture, to keep you weight focused.
Yeah, totally. So this kind of moves on nicely to another topic that you covered on the podcast, which was malnutrition at every size.
Oh, yeah.
I think it would be great to spend some time on. So I think you said it's often referred to as undernutrition as well.
Yeah. So the thing about malnutrition is that we've got a lot of information about malnutrition from various famines that have occurred. And in that state, you've got your typical, what you might think of someone as being undernourished, malnourished, very emaciated looking humans who have no reserves whatsoever left. That's our kind of frame of reference for malnutrition and the way that the public usually thinks about it.
Yeah.
But when we've got a population where there's a lot of diversity of BMIs, of body weight in the population to start with, and lots of dieting behaviour, you can pretty quickly end up malnourished. Like the clinical guidelines for the assessment of malnutrition vary from country to country, and some of them are still have BMI in there, and I think I talked about it on the podcast as well. Usually that's a guideline that's been developed using expert consensus rather than data derived assessment. Yeah. So it's just what the experts think, and that's much more likely to be driven by their confirmation bias around malnutrition. So it's much less likely to be kind of more scientifically valid, which is frustrating because we've got a lot of malnutrition out there, but whatever. The guidelines who use data to develop the sort of, I guess, algorithms to decide when malnutrition is being experienced by a person tend to have things like a percentage weight loss over a period of time, as well as some biochemical markers and some. So you do a physical exam, you can tell when people's muscle stores are wasted, and particularly in the face, when somebody's suffering from malnutrition, no matter what their weight is, you can feel it. The temples are hollowed out. No matter how big somebody is, you still see that in a face. A face is kind of a really very useful place to assess malnutrition. But that goes under the radar. When somebody comes into a hospital for whatever reason, if they're in a larger body size, they get kind of ignored in terms of malnutrition screening in a lot of places. And I've got to say that in Australia, we're not bad at screening for malnutrition, but that is all dietitian driven because we know we'd rather feed people while they're in there because then they get out more quickly. You know, it reduces bed days in hospital when we feed people enough. But malnutrition screening doesn't happen widely for larger bodied people in a lot of places in the world. And it can obviously impact really negatively on the other stuff that they're in hospital for as well. And on top of that, just sort of purely sort of medical aspect of it, we've got the attitudes of people who are involved with feeding people, and that includes doctors, that, a little bit of weight loss during hospital stay has got to be a good thing. We're helping them along. And that just drives me utterly to distraction. It's completely appalling. And particularly in, I've got an episode on starving in the intensive care unit, which is kind of, timely given our current situation in intensive care units.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're thinking about how you could properly improve repair, especially if someone's in hospital, it's typically because they've had surgery, they've got an infection, like there is some disease process going on.
Sick already.
And in all of those situations, having adequate energy come in is going to be helpful. And one of the things you talked about as part of this that I found really useful to think about is that there's often this phrase of like, well, we'll look at the size of their body. They obviously have so many energy stores on their body, which is incorrect. But the storage capacity for so many vitamins and minerals and different components of food is so small within the body. So even if someone supposedly has all of this energy hanging around in their body, they don't have all of the vitamins and minerals that are essential.
It's not a doomsday locker. This is not that. Exactly. And you can't, particularly now we're living in a sort of post-bariatric surgery world where not even just somebody in a larger body who has who's malnourished at the moment, but if they've got a heart failure, they need X, Y, and Z treatment done, and their digestive system is completely replumbed to literally avoid absorbing nutrients, it's incredibly difficult for dietitians to do our job. We need to nourish that person so that they can overcome or manage whatever they're in for, We want them to live.
Yeah.
But bariatric surgery, particularly the bypass type surgeries, they take that away. It's like being in space without oxygen supply and no hope of getting home. It is absolutely terrifying as a clinician, and it's got to be worse as the patient who's done all these things because they were told they'd be good for them, and they end up with one of the conditions that happens quite frequently to people who are older, nothing to do with their weight, and they are, they're basically, nutrition resistant. And so, it's a coming wave. It's my hot prediction that we're going to be watching in horror as a lot of people are unable to, overcome things that we're usually okay with dealing with nutritionally.
Yeah. But I guess the problem with that is it won't be then blamed on the bariatric surgery. It'll be blamed on, well, these people were obviously not very healthy. They weren't looking after themselves because otherwise they wouldn't be in that size of a body.
Yeah, well, I think that would be the take that maybe family and friends and other people in their social circles may take. But dietitians are pretty good at sticking it in that situation because it is really clearly what's going on, Yep. And so, I mean, when I did work in a hospital for a number of years as a dietitian as well. I've always done a lot of things. I didn't even talk about that, but whatever. I was a clinical dietitian for 3 years in addition to lecturing, in addition to having a private practice for a while. This is before kids.
Yeah.
Just watching a patient starve when I've got, surrounded by food and I can't get it into them. Even the TPM, the vein feeds, not kind of the storage capacity again of the liver. It's kind of like resistant to even TPN nourishment at that point because they were so malnourished for so long. And it's just horrible, totally horrible, really traumatizing for them. I mean, many patients died, really traumatizing for me as a clinician to not be able to do anything. You could feel completely helpless to help them.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah. And
Sorry about the low note. This is why it's really it's so important, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is what, keeps me going.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing I was going to say was the times where people are then told that it's a good idea for them to lose weight, and given this whole idea around malnutrition makes completely no sense in terms of when someone is coming in for surgery.
Yeah, let's get you malnourished before that, major surgery.
Yeah.
Let's decondition you so that you don't have those ready stores of X, Y, and Z in your recovery after this. I mean, even, knee replacements, you do recover faster if you're well nourished going into it.
Yeah.
But there's a whole heap of stuff around orthopedic surgeons' attitudes towards heavy people, plus the skills and the equipment, and it's a whole, it needs a lot of champions within that profession to come in and call out discriminatory practices and to push for better, better actual prostheses, better knee replacement devices, the hip replacement devices, better techniques, all that kind of stuff. And the appetite, unfortunately, for that is lower than it should be.
Yeah.
But, as non-surgeons, we can help to nudge them and remind them that, doctors and surgeons are able to operate on neonates and fetuses in the womb. Yep. We do hard things.
Yeah.
And people in that profession who do hard things are usually heroes, and we need some heroes in medicine for larger bodies and surgery for larger bodies, because there's at least a third of the population who would be triumphing along with that.
Yeah, definitely. And then, I mean, the same with fertility. I think it's like people are told to lose weight before you're about to embark on this thing that is going to suck the best part of 50,000 calories out of you, and then whatever is needed, 500 odd, 1,000 odd for everyday breastfeeding, like to then be starving yourself before that because it's supposedly better for fertility also makes no sense.
That is really another case of we've got, insulin resistance driving some of that, the issues people will have with the frequency of ovulation and the sort of fulfillment of ovulation. Then if you put somebody on a weight loss plan, that tends to reduce their insulin resistance. You tend to get ovulation happening more regularly, and so people do tend to fall pregnant a bit. But it's actually not the weight loss. It's the high levels of physical activity. It's perhaps some changes to food. It's not weight loss doing the thing, but they've conflated that process. You can get those kind of changes, and of course we do with people with PCOS all the time, to change sort of lifestyle elements in a weight-neutral way that does help with ovulation, and it helps with insulin resistance, or helps, increase insulin sensitivity. They're the things that are driving that increased chance of successful ovulation and successful conception. But it's kind of dumbed down to the lowest common denominator when it's weight loss. It's getting the damn credit for it.
Yeah. And the other one, the indicator of malnutrition was, I think it's 5 to 10% of weight lost over a 3 to 6 month period.
Yeah, and does that sound familiar?
That's like what every diet is hoping to achieve.
It's like the claim lines on every weight loss product. Yeah. Just like, it's utterly maddening.
Yeah, that when I read that, I was like, that seems to be like no sense in comparison to what is then pretty much recommended at every doctor's visit if someone is in a larger body.
Yep, exactly. I think a lot of what drives that, and I got this sense many years ago, and it hasn't really changed. People always confirm this belief that someone with a larger body must be overeating to stay larger. This is the sort of natural understanding of what must be going on. But in fact, if the body weight is stable, whether their BMI is 22 or 42 or 62, if the body weight's stable, then they're eating to meet their nutritional needs at that time, their energy needs. They're not overeating. This is not, you cannot read somebody's eating pattern off their body. And Yeah, it's so many of the traps that we fall into around weight centrism are because of that naturalistic belief about what a body size says about somebody's lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you've done a whole podcast on overeating and craving and binging, which I want to touch on. I mean, the final thing I just wanted to say in that malnutrition piece, and I think, I don't know if this came up in that podcast or it might have been in another one, but you talking about during adolescence and there being this kind of 3 years where you have this change in growth, which I think is really useful to know. So can you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, this was just amazing, and as a parent of children who are sort of coming into that phase now, is even more kind of, it's cool to know about. But anyway, the thing about puberty is that those growth changes can happen anywhere between about, well, it depends on the sex, but between about the age of 11 and 17. And the magic happens during an intense 3-year period. All the sort of sex characteristic changes, all of that kind of stuff. It's really, really intense in a 3-year period, but you never know when you're in that. You can only ever, once somebody gets to about 17 or 18 years old, you can look back at their growth pattern and go, oh yeah, that's the 3 years. That was for me. But when you're in it, you can't confirm that you're in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And some people will have their height spurt first, and some will have their weight spurt first, followed eventually by whichever the other one is.
Yeah.
Some people have them at the same time as well, so they kind of remain relatively proportional. Of course, you always get sort of taller during their main growth spurt years. But if you've got somebody who's having particularly a girl, if she's having her weight spurt first, that is going to track on our growth charts as if she's jumping percentile lines, because the percentiles for growth, for height and for weight, are these kind of smooth lines representing a whole heap of sort of group characteristics. They don't capture effectively the amazing velocity of changes that happen during those 3 years. And so, we've got this situation where we've got a girl who's having a weight spurt before a height spurt, but everyone is freaking out because she seems to be jumping lines upwards into sort of what might be classed as more risky categories, which I don't agree with, but whatever. And then that person is over-pathologized. She might get dragged to the dietitian who tries to give her healthy eating advice very well-meaningly, but ending up tipping off the, first stages of disordered eating that might spiral into something much more serious. And all because we are panicked about weight gain.
Yeah.
Even on the background of puberty, which is such an amazing metamorphosis time for humans. So, yes, my take-home message there is we need just to calm down about puberty and recognise that they're like changing from bugs into butterflies, and what happens in between is not something that we need to white knuckle, basically.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you made the comment that if at the time, say someone is having their weight spurt before their growth spurt, and then you try and intervene by restricting or other methods.
Yeah, their height spurt will get stunted if they're not eating enough. Yeah. So insufficient energy intake during adolescence will stunt height.
Yeah.
And there will be, once there's enough food going around in there, the weight will restore to whatever the biological, what their weight would have been in general. But the height's never going to catch up. You don't really get catch-up height growth properly if there's been extended energy restriction during puberty. So, not that we're heightist, but that's a pretty serious intervention into somebody's usual, what their natural history would otherwise have been throughout their lifespan.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the issue as well with it is often as humans, especially around weight, we are good at looking at the outcome and then trying to come up with a possible explanation for why this is occurring. So if someone is having a weight spurt first and you're then trying to work out why that is occurring, you're like, oh, okay, we had McDonald's now a little more frequently than used to, or I noticed I've got more of a sweet tooth, or like you build up all of the
you're pathologizing those normal things which aren't necessarily the drivers. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then for someone who is getting more, I don't know, leaner and muscular and higher, maybe the height's there, their explanation is, well, I'm keeping up the sports quite a bit. And so, yeah, you find a narrative to fit whatever is actually going on, but that doesn't mean that it's true.
Yeah, we are not in charge. We're definitely not in charge. And when we do try to be in charge, we've messed up.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Health professionals and humans.
Yeah, totally. And the reason I wanted to bring that up is like, I think dieting at any point and restriction at any point is a problem. But at that particular time, it is so much more likely to be a problem for reasons in terms of impacting on physiology at a really important moment, but it also someone is so much more sensitive and going through this process of turning into an adult and separation from their parents and their understanding who they are as an individual and all of those processes that are going on and how even for someone who's well adjusted and isn't dieting, that's a difficult time of life, and to then throw this extra thing into the mix, it makes it so much worse.
Here are a few more bricks to carry. Despite the load you're already under, because being a teenager is something else.
Let's talk about then your podcast on overeating and craving and binging, and it's interesting with this. Part of the reason I want to talk about this as well is I haven't actually done a lot of writing around this or a lot of podcasts around this as a topic. And I was recently at the end of last year working with someone who's helping on SEO and looking at, okay, what are the things that people are searching for versus what are the things that I've necessarily written an article on or matches up with the title. And what became acutely obvious at that point is there's about one or two search terms that people are looking for in terms of anorexia. So it might be like anorexia or anorexia recovery, and that's kind of it. But if you put in binging, craving, overeating, all of those search terms, you have 30, 40, 50 different combinations of those things that people are searching for on a really, really regular basis. And I think I fell into the trap of like, I understand that restriction is at the heart of all of this, but the majority of people who are searching are not of that way of understanding things. And they think their problem, their problem isn't the restriction. The restriction was when things were working really, really well. And their problem is the binging or the craving or the overeating or however they are using those different terms. Like that is now the problem.
Yeah. Yes. It's where the problem is located. And if it's located, if people locate it in the bodies, researchers and people, if they say, well, this eating behavior is problematic because look at my body, here's the evidence that it is. And so that is all shades of fat phobic usually. And even eating disorder researchers and therapists who will say quite openly that binging is the issue because it causes fatness. That's what I'm working on. This is why I'm working with people, to help them stop binging, because there's nothing worse than being fat. That's the narrative for the work they do. That is where they're putting the meaning. I help people with binge eating disorder because binging's terrible because fatness. And as somebody who is also in the eating disorder field and with lived experience, would say, actually, if you think about how eating disorders are defined and about how eating disorders are experienced, it's actually about distress.
Yeah.
And we're quite happy to problematize distress. This is actually what we're trying to help our clients with and support them through so that they experience less distress. That is the bit that ruins your life, is the distress.
Yeah.
Not the binging. But, these two types of clinician will both call themselves eating disorder clinicians, and one will locate the problem in the body and the other will locate the problem in the distress and in the emotional experience of it. And so it's really that, that divide has not helped. And so we get these terms, we demonize binging, when really that is a coping mechanism that follows very predictably from restriction. And restriction itself is a coping mechanism as well. And it's all around body distress, right?
Yeah.
Or the perceived body distress. And so a lot of the body distress is what we as a society have decided is a problem, nothing to do with the actual body itself. So we've got all these layers, like onion layers, of where the issue lies. And if you're thinking about the issue when it comes, when we've come to the body bit, you're not really doing deep work. These people are not going to be properly in recovery. You're not really doing your job as an eating disorder therapist if you are actually deciding that you're in league with binging being the bad thing, basically. Binging is very adaptive strategy and a very adaptive, very predictable result of restriction.
Yeah, totally. And I also think that there's the other layer of, for a lot of people, they have underlying anxiety or depression or other mental health issues or other uncomfortableness that actually has nothing to do with their body and their body shape, and it predates any of this going on, but that kind of gets forgotten about because then the binging becomes the problem, and then everything just gets seen through that lens.
Yeah,
so
we
at
transfer.
Any point when I feel uncomfortable, at any time that I feel anxious, it must be because of something I did or I didn't do with food.
And look, our bodies are with us all the time. They're a really concrete thing that we can count on to be there, right, in a physical sense.
Yeah.
And so they're really an obvious thing to blame for anxiety, for feeling bad. And the body is seen as something that can sort of take the heat that might otherwise be unbearable to deal with if we acknowledge that it was really beyond our control. So really, when I explain this to health professionals and people that I'm working with, it's a process of transference, or something is big in their life that goes beyond what they can deal with. Like it might be a problem in their relationship, their sort of key relationship, where the other person just isn't coming to the party. They're not, there's no resolution in sight, and it's very distressing for the person. That all of that frustration very quickly can be transferred to the body being wrong, in inverted commas.
Yeah.
And the body is a natural place for this to go as well, because we have this perceived idea that we can fix it through our own volitional means. So I'm going to make this big problem. That frustration is kind of going to transfer itself onto my body. That happens subconsciously. And it makes us feel immediately better that we can then deal with it. And I'm going to deal with it by going on a diet. I'm going to, do this diet, that diet, lose whatever amount of weight, go, decide to do something that feels heroic, and I can do that, and suddenly I've got a plan, and that plan's going to relieve me of some of that stress that I'm feeling. But really, we haven't dealt with the actual issue. The body's taking the brunt of it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you are grasping for a sense of control, and if you narrow your focus enough, you can find something that feels really controllable.
That's it. And because we're with our bodies all the time, they're there. They will take the fall for us, unfortunately.
And so with binging, and I can't remember if you will remember this from the podcast, but what is the definition for it, or how is something defined as a binge versus that wasn't a binge?
Usually it's defined by loss of control. A sense of loss of control, the sense of being out of control. with eating, and eating more than sort of was planned, or more than they would usually eat. That's one of the most broad definitions. And then it depends on who's doing the assessment. If it's a psychologist doing the assessment, there is also room for that psychologist to decide whether it was a legitimately large amount of food, or whether it was just perceived as a large amount of food by the person experiencing it. It's a huge, dodgy loophole. Huge. Yeah. The main crux of it, though, is the sense of loss of control and distress related with that. So if you're just at a party and you end up feeling uncomfortably full at the end of it, that's not a binge, although somebody might say, like a layperson might call it that.
Yeah.
And binge has become such a big part of our vernacular too. We binge TV all the time, but it really doesn't have much to do with the way that we use the word in eating behaviour terms. But that loss of control and the distress is really that's the key. And you see, that's got nothing to do with body size.
No. And I do think, though, there is some subjectivity to that as well, because when someone, and this is something I've experienced with clients, when someone talks about losing control, that loss of control is because they've gone over some threshold, or is often because they've gone over some threshold that they deem appropriate. So for someone, loss of control was I ate a whole pizza and a thing of ice cream, and for someone else it's I ate half a chocolate bar and I said I was going to eat a third.
Yeah. You know what? I don't even think it matters much, because if we say that it does, we are falling into the trap of being interested in the food intake itself in a broad sense at that moment.
Oh, sure. So I guess my reason for mentioning is part of a way for feeling like you didn't lose control is broadening the parameters more and more for what it means of like I crossed the line. Yes,
you mean when you're unpacking it with the person. Yeah, yes. Is that real?
Yeah.
But I mean, again, used with caution, I guess, because we can end up colluding with that sense of, well, eating a lot at once is bad, but actually eating a lot at once for a human is very, we have bodies that will totally deal with that.
Yeah.
We have stomachs that stretch a damn lot. Yeah. We have, digestive systems that they just take their time. They will get through it. They're amazing. And they will get all of what they can out of it. They very rarely really object in a kind of completely spectacular sense.
Yeah.
Human bodies are incredible. So we can't actually label eating till feeling quite stuffed as pathological in itself. We would only do that if we've got this sort of weight-centric lens that we're worried about what that might mean weight-wise.
Yeah, sure. And just to clarify, I'm not then trying to create a line that then says, okay, then if you have that amount of food, then that definitely is a binge. It's more of a thought experiment.
Perspective.
And starting to be like, if you thought about this differently and the line was a different place, how would that have experienced being different for you? Because basically I'm like, there is no amount of food that is off limits. It's just when you're creating some level of demarcation, that's when you start to trip up.
That's it. I agree with that. So it's so easy for clinicians who aren't as solid in their weight inclusive work to slip into it, though.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm like, I've just really got to be very clear about what I'm saying here, and that there is no limit. I mean, I have been argued with in protracted, very animated manners by psychologists trying to argue the opposite of that because of their ideas around nutrition. I'm like, that's, not your lane.
Yeah. But I also think about it, even in my own experience, and I have never had an eating disorder. I'm very lucky. I've always had a good relationship with food. But there are times that I eat in a way that I know lots of people would identify as this was a binge. So I finish a meal and then I'm spending the next 5 minutes eating with the spatula from the pan more food. Or doing things that for many people they would say, well, I lost control, I wasn't present there, etc. And so I don't know. I think depending on how someone frames it has a really big impact on what that experience then means.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the history, that person's food story, what they learned about eating from their family, what they learned about eating from their social groups, it's so important to understand that context.
Yep.
So important.
Yeah. And I mean, you talked about as well, we've kind of just touched on there, just the impact of the cognitive dietary restraint and how that then affects disinhibition. Do you want to talk a little about that?
Well, we've kind of touched on it before, that restriction. And so cognitive dietary restraint is around how rigid somebody's eating behaviours are. So inflexible eating. So it may be that they only allow themselves a certain amount of food or certain types of food. Eating might be regimented to particular times of the day. Basically it's dieting behaviour. Yeah. And in psychological terms, it's inflexibility that's ruling the day there. It's rules and regulations, external rather than internally led eating behaviour.
Yeah.
And so the opposite of it is this flexible dietary restraint. And in a sort of more lay terms, that's the intuitive eating style, sort of flexible eating style, eating to hunger and fullness cues. And so we use the measures that have those two things, one at one end and the other at the other end, to try to unpack how tightly wound a person is about their eating behaviour. And certainly the way that they've grown up and the kind of messages they receive from their caregivers, particularly the mothers, but if the fathers are around, then that impacts on the kids' behaviour, eating behaviour as well. It's just sort of who they're mostly with.
Yeah.
And if the messages are, no, you can't have seconds, no, you shouldn't be eating that, no, we don't eat that because you get fat, those kind of really weight-centric messages, then the person is going to be more likely to be up on that more restrained end.
Yeah.
It takes more work for us to tap them down towards more flexible, calm eating. Because, of course, once you break a rule, you've got an element of shame around that, and then the perception is that there's going to be some sort of consequence body shape-wise, then you're going to feel anticipatory shame as well. It's just a big shame breadbasket, basically, eating rigidly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that as you said, like once you break that rule, often you then have the impact of like, oh, well, what the hell? Or like new diet starts tomorrow, or it means that once you go over some threshold, rather than it being more likely that you're going to stop, it becomes more likely that you're not going to stop.
Well, that and it's so shame driven as well. Yeah. And that disinhibition is quite powerfully particularly if somebody is overall, they're hungry, like they're energy restricted overall.
Yeah.
You've got the dual power of the fact that you've got shame driving eating at that moment, plus you're actually like legitimately underfed. And so all of your hormones are screaming, feed me, please. And so just tipping over that waterfall into eating, your body's behind the wheel, but your mind is totally there thinking that it's the one doing the driving. It's very fascinating, complicated, amazing process. I mean, there's a reason we're such a successful species. And part of that is that we don't go hungry willingly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And so the final area I want to cover, which you did a really great podcast on, was blood test results and how these are impacted on by weight loss or restriction. And so, just as a starter, when were the ranges for a lot of these blood tests created, and how are they updated? What populations were used? Do you know all those details?
Yeah, so the cardiovascular ones, so things like cholesterol levels, the first time we had a handle on those as risk markers was in the Framingham studies. So that's a big, long-term, multi-generational study of the people living in a town in the US that started during the 50s. They enrolled many thousands of people, and then they enrolled the children of those families that are in the study and their children. I think they are up to about third or fourth generation now. And so we have a long-term data set looking at, as I said before, those, if we've got these factors on day one and we figure out how long it goes from at that age with those factors until they died and of what, we can then develop up a risk profile for that deathy event, heart attack, stroke, whatever. And so that's really where we connected blood pressure with strokes and cholesterol levels with heart attacks and other and the type of stroke that has a similar origin to heart attacks. And so the reference ranges originally were based on those populations. And I think mostly, particularly for heart attacks, haven't changed very much. Other reference ranges, like your sort of diabetes diagnostic ones, are different from country to country, and they're usually dictated by the professional body most interested in that disease, which is also interesting. It's not epidemiologists who set the reference ranges. It's the, cardiovascular health associations, medical associations, it's interesting. And there's a whole amazing amount of literature about how we're over-medicalising what's normal human variation within biochem results and so forth. But so that's basically where the reference ranges come from.
And with framing, just as a place, framing it, is it an affluent place, a kind of middle of the road? What's kind of?
It was picked. It was picked because it was gloriously average.
Okay, fine.
And close to a university. I'm pretty sure it was those two things that made that was, the researchers didn't have to come too far to do the interviews, and it was, not special in any particular way. But of course, it's very special now. I mean, it does hold a great place in the scientific record, basically. It's good that we did it. But that's where the references are from. So if we think about the people and their lives and their biochem measures, those people were not people who were dieting at the time, particularly our cardiovascular disease markers. They're set with people who do not live today. They're set with people who lived decades and decades ago and died decades and decades ago now. So it's a different world that they were in, basically, is the take home. But they're certainly not people who were energy restricted. We don't have any, apart from look ahead, and we found that there was no difference in biochem, we don't really have a good handle on chronic disease risk in energy restricted populations. What we know is that energy restriction can drag down our chronic disease biomarkers. It drags down cholesterol, unless somebody is really chronically severely malnourished, in which case cholesterol levels tend to go up. But usually, your usual kind of dieted type person, it'll drag down cholesterol, it will drag down your glycosylated hemoglobin, which is basically a test of how much exposure your red blood cells have had to higher glucose levels in the blood. It will increase your insulin sensitivity, as we were speaking about before. So it does change the risk markers. It makes them look like lower risk markers. So it's more similar to risk markers in the populations with a lower cardiovascular risk who aren't dieting. Does that make sense?
Yep.
But it is kind of like a party trick. It's a hack, body hack. It's not a real thing. That dragging down of the cholesterol because you haven't eaten enough over the prior few weeks is not necessarily going to result in you having a less likelihood of a heart attack in 30 years' time. When you think about it that way too, it's kind of absurd, right?
Yeah.
But it's an invalid comparator population. to talk about it in scientific terms. It would have to be a whole different energy restricted population to be able to make that statement that there's a relationship.
Yeah. And as you said, like that was basically what they did with the look ahead study, and it didn't really pan out and make any significant improvement. But it is I just going to say, like, it is so sad that then becomes the yardstick for, are you becoming healthier? And there's a difference between markers moving to a better range because you're genuinely doing things that are supporting your health versus you're basically, I don't know, hacking the numbers.
Yeah. So we've got a number of things that we can do to the things that, if we've got access and we've got availability, and we've got the kind of financial situation where we can buy more fruit and veg, change the way that we eat. If we've got those things available to us, and not everyone does, but if we do, and then we make those kind of dietary changes, that in some people does have an impact on their cholesterol levels. And we know that both the dietary patterns and the cholesterol levels in that context can be related to a decreased mortality risk. And it's more likely to be a real thing because it's extended,
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is basically what we do for everyone who's got a BMI of less than 25 anyway, like normal care for someone with a BMI of less than 25. If they come in with high cholesterol levels or other biomarkers that are a bit worrisome, okay, well, let's work on some dietary changes, maybe get you a bit more physically active if that's an issue for them.
Yeah.
If we can, see what happens. And so we do know how to do weight neutral care. It's literally what people with a BMI of less than 25 get now. And so that doesn't, humans are still human when they flip over that BMI threshold to the heavier BMI categories. They don't stop receiving benefit from things that help smaller body people with their chronic disease risk at that point. But we, for some reason, the blinders come out and it's wait. Like, it doesn't make any sense. There's so many logical gaps when it comes to our weight centrism.
Yeah, I think that Reagan Chastain has a thing of like asking the question of like, what would you do in this situation for a smaller bodied person, and let's start there.
Yeah, or like just I've tried dieting before, and it didn't work, and I don't want to do it now. What else have you got for me?
Yeah,
make them squirm. And the other thing that I have touched on it in the podcast a bit, but it is a huge issue, and that is research that involves larger bodied people very rarely is non-weight loss research. So we need to know how medications work for people, particularly people in much larger bodies, much higher on the BMI scale beyond the clinical trial characteristics. We need to know how effective chemo is. We need to know how effective birth control is. We need to know how effective basically all of the drugs we prescribe to people are across different body sizes. We don't trial it. We don't know how it works except in the context of someone who's not having enough energy to get by. It's a huge, huge gaping hole in our knowledge.
Do you know if people are starting to do that research?
I am. There have been a few, particularly Mediterranean studies on the Mediterranean diet, so interventional studies on the Mediterranean diet. There have been a few good ones where they've used sort of broader range of body sizes as their trial participants, and they've randomised them into Mediterranean style pattern versus non, or they've fiddled with the different styles in there, and they haven't wanted to also piggyback weight loss outcomes on there. So there's particularly for cholesterol, actually, hot tip. There's some good results, good statistically significant results coming out of those kind of studies. Then they're properly weight neutral studies, but we're still a long way from doctors and dietitians, even nutritionists, being able to say, look, we know this way of eating works quite well for smaller bodied people. We know this way of eating works quite well for this condition for larger bodied people. And we know which is superior for your situation that doesn't involve starving yourself. We're a long way from that. But that's really the goal, is figure it out and know what is the more superior medication, more superior intervention for somebody with a higher body weight versus a lower body weight. Like, they need to get the appropriate treatment for them, basically.
Yeah.
And at the moment, they're completely underserved.
Yeah, totally. I was wondering if you've come across this. So I work a lot with people with eating disorders, and then they're in recovery. And yeah, if there's any good research around blood markers as part of that, like I can find stuff around where someone is at the start point, or when they have had an eating disorder for a long time. What are some of the things that are more likely to occur in terms of liver enzymes or whatever? But in terms of the kind of the messy middle bit, has there been anything looking at okay, these are typical patterns that start to happen more often in this population?
Yeah, I'm trying to chase that down now. It's really difficult to find, because we tend to, with eating disorder recovery, that is it's a bit of a sort of secret. I don't tend to study the biochem, because it's less trial-based, more therapy-based, right? These are really vulnerable people.
Yeah.
I don't tend to mess with them too much when they're in therapy. And when we've done trials, it tends to be trials of like manualized therapy, group therapy, blah, 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 rather than, and so it's sort of eating behavior outcomes rather than biochem.
Okay.
So it's not well researched there. But also in like regular weight loss trials, I tend to kind of want to ignore what's going on during the weight regain phase, because I don't want to believe it's really there. And so we don't, again, the data for that is not signposted very clearly. But my reading of it is, during weight regain after significant weight losses, it looks like fatty liver is something that can happen during that weight regain phase, in a similar way to how it might happen without the original weight loss. Kind of happens from an earlier point, though, which is horrifying. I mean, not that fatty liver is a big deal actually anyway, but it's another one of these things where, like, oh, that's an unintended consequence of weight loss, is, you've got a higher chance of having more severe fatty liver in the weight regain phase, that I'm not going to tell you about, because I don't want to, you've still got to try to lose weight.
Yeah.
It's in terms of inflammation, I'm having a look at that now for the current podcast I'm in development for, and it looks like any positive energy balance, including the weight regain phase back up to settling point, does include that higher inflammation factor as well. Whether that's significant in the whole context of somebody's life, who knows?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's tricky to pin down, and it's likely to be quite complicated. And when you are trying to assess this stuff, it's, what's going on in the liver, right? What's going on in the fat tissue, what's going on in the muscle tissue, what's going on in the blood markers. There's a lot of different things you could look at to figure out what's going on. It's a very sort of dynamic state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, for me, I'm kind of less concerned in terms of like, look, if your blood glucose is going up, or your HbA1c is going up, or there's these things, or your cholesterol, like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're in the middle of something going on.
Yeah, this is not normal life. Yeah,
this is not normal life. You're going through this phase.
Yeah, it's convalescence from malnutrition.
Yeah, exactly. But I guess, I mean, my reason for asking was then just to be able to point those people to that research and say, look, this is just what happens during this phase, and it is normal. Yeah,
I wish we had some really nice, clear papers.
Yeah,
that said that. But there's so much, even in mainstream eating disorder treatment sources of information, your eating disorder associations and stuff like that, because of, like we were talking about earlier, it's a completely different mindset when you're inside an eating disorder, and any sort of whispers that weight regain might have to happen, or blah, 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 blah. That stuff, those suggestions will make people run to the hills away from seeking help. And so it's a tricky thing to put on there. Obviously it would be, but we're looking at it through the lenses of people who are not in a vulnerable state about what weight gain might mean to them personally. So I think that's another, it's just a bit awkward to try to focus on that stuff. I want to, but I think that's why the information's not so explored in the scientific research.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Look, Fiona, this has been wonderful. Like, as I said at the top, I really love your podcast. And so it was nice to be able to go through this in detail and show people what you do as part of that. Is there anything we didn't go through that you wanted to touch on?
Oh, we've covered a lot of stuff. I mean, I guess I did notice we have covered some quite negative things as well. And a take home always is, if your health provider is is causing you distress around body, giving you a hard time around body, that there are other people out there. Even if you have to source support from another country or another area, those people do exist. And so I would really encourage you to sort of reach out and try to find a healthcare team that is going to support you in working on supporting your health now without, the weight focus as well.
Yeah.
We're out there.
I would definitely agree with that. And I've also found that sometimes when people speak up, they actually get a much better level of care without actually having to change.
Yes. So that simple question, Reagan Chastain's question, she's amazing. But that question, like what treatment would a smaller bodied person get? Can I have that now? If you can practice that, take someone with you who can drop that line in if in the moment you're too frozen to be able to use the line. It can be really powerful and it can change the course of what they would be recommending to you as well.
Yeah. Nice. So look, where can people go if they want to find out more information about you?
So I am on social media a fair bit, interacting with people. Twitter is currently my favourite. I go through stages, Twitter and Facebook. So you can find me on Twitter under my name, Fiona Willer, and on Facebook as Health Not Diets. If you're looking for professional development, if you're a clinician, so dietitian, nutritionist, psychologist, researcher, medical professional, medical specialist, all of these kind of people are who come to my courses and do my trainings, then www.healthnotdiets.com has got some course options there. And also my podcast is called Unpacking Weight Science, and that's sitting on www.unpackingweightscience.com. And there's a subscription model for the more recent episodes, which is only $5 a month, which is pretty low cost, I think. But I've released a lot of the earlier episodes now for free. So that's on Spotify, all of your podcast apps. So it's easy to sort of check it out and see if you're into it.
Perfect. Well, yeah, I will put all of those links in the show notes. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Thanks. And thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So that was my conversation with Fiona Willer. She is a lovely and compassionate human being who is equally science smart when it comes to myth busting around weight loss research and knowing what is good for human health. So if you like the nerdier side of science and weight science and everything connected to this stuff, then I would highly suggest checking out her podcast, Unpacking Weight Science. So I said at the start that I had a couple of recommendations for you of things to check out, and they actually both come from Tim Ferriss's podcast. The first is episode 492 with Richard Schwartz. So Richard Schwartz is a family therapist and is the creator of the Internal Family Systems, or IFS. So IFS is a form of psychotherapy that's been used since the 1980s and is especially helpful for dealing with trauma. And despite the name, so including family in the title and Richard being a family therapist, this isn't about doing therapy with your family. It's about the internal families that you have in you, so all the different parts within you. And a number of years ago, I read Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, which is a seminal book and really is incredible at looking at how trauma affects the body and the mind. And the second half of the book is all about the different modalities that are evidence-based for helping with trauma, and IFS is one such practice. So it's been something I've been interested in exploring, but I just not got round to it, and it just hadn't happened yet. And what was so fantastic about this episode was that rather than just talk about what it was or what it is in theory, Tim and Richard do a live session. So Tim last year opened up, or on his show opened up, about having a history of childhood sexual abuse when he was young, and how this had been something he's been working on in therapy for a number of years. And so this was what was worked on as part of that session. And Tim really is phenomenal in being open and vulnerable to do this live. And you just get this incredible sense from them being able to demonstrate that of what this style of therapy is like and how beneficial it can be. And it's not just about people who've suffered with big capital T trauma. It could be really helpful for anyone dealing with different aspects of who they are. And yeah, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the experience with IFS as with psychedelics, but without having to do the psychedelics as part of it. So yeah, I really highly recommend checking out that episode. It's episode 492 of The Tim Ferriss Show. And then the other recommendation, also a Tim Ferriss interview, is number 485 with Jerry Seinfeld. So Jerry Seinfeld probably needs no introduction, being the richest actor on the planet, just a little short of being a billionaire. And Seinfeld, the show, is probably my favorite show of all time, or at least my favorite comedy of all time. And I've watched all 9 seasons of it multiple times, and it always has me in stitches. And unlike many comedy TV shows, especially shows that go on for a long time, it never went bad. So it still finished on a high. I think it started getting really good from about season 3 onwards. But yeah, it is all very, very good comedy. And I've listened to a number of interviews with Seinfeld before, and I've always been disappointed. So Seinfeld isn't normally a great guest. He always feels annoyed, or like he doesn't want to be there, or like every question the person is asking is a stupid question. You typically get short answers. He just is like this black box where you just don't find out really anything about him or about his process or about what makes him tick. And it just, yeah, I'd always left other interviews feeling like they had been unenjoyable, and then I felt like Seinfeld was arrogant and grumpy, and really I still feel the same way about both of those things. But in this interview, he just is more open than I've heard in any other interview, and Tim really does a great job here with making that so. And I think Seinfeld had a lot of respect for Tim Ferriss, and so I think that's probably why he was more open and he was able to have a good interview with him. But yeah, it is definitely the best one I've heard. And so if you are like me and you grew up with Seinfeld, or even now, because he does the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, which is now on Netflix. So if you've watched any of that and you want to find out more about him, then I would highly recommend checking out the podcast episode. So it's episode 485 of the Tim Ferriss Show. And hat tip goes to Merit for these recommendations, as she told me about both of them. I kind of got off the Tim Ferriss podcast train and very, very rarely check it. And so I think I would have definitely missed both of these if it weren't for her. And so thank you, Merit. That is it for this week. As I mentioned at the top, I'm going to start opening up the practice to new clients shortly, and we'll really start with a bigger push over the next couple of weeks and putting out more content. But if you're interested in working together or finding out more, you can head over now to 7-health.com/help. So HELP. I will catch you again next week. I will see you then.